acts. Originally aired on television in 1986, it was directed by Gary Nelson and brought back Peter Ustinov yet again as the esteemed detective, Hercule Poirot. In this one, Poirot travels to Acapulco to visit Hastings. Almost immediately upon arrival, when the two of them are invited to a party at the home of movie star Charles Cartwright, one of the guests dies under mysterious circumstances. And when another of the party guests is murdered shortly thereafter, Poirot is thrust into the middle of another mystery. The following review contains spoilers. I've been on this Peter Ustinov Poirot journey for a little while now, and as I mentioned in my review of Dead Man's Folly, I think it's become clear as the series stretched on that Peter Ustinov and the filmmakers were reforming this character to whatever they wanted him to be at the moment. And I think that holds true in this film. When we're introduced to him, meeting Hastings at the airport, we don't meet the jovial, energetic Poirot that we saw in 13 at Dinner. This time he's much more of a curmudgeon, basically. That side of the character has reared its head to varying degrees throughout the series. But especially this time and in the previous film, Poirot is shown to be someone who agrees quickly to attend events and visit people, but almost instantly regrets it, and makes no efforts to hide his distaste for what he's subjected himself to or whoever he's forced to talk with. It's kind of a fun take on Poirot, and as portrayed by Ustinov, it's even more so. He's a grump, recognized and revered wherever he goes, but shown to be bored with it all. At least that's how he starts the film, and I'll get into how the character makes an about-face later on. Also at the beginning, we learn that Poirot is apparently in the midst of writing his memoirs, a task he embraces as if it were a cactus. I really like that idea, seeing an aging Poirot looking back on his life and committing it to the page could have been an interesting concept for the movie to play with, and seeing his disinterest in the project shows that he is not one who enjoys reflection on his past glories, other than to not so humbly brag about his reputation. Instead, he is interested in the case at hand, when he has one, to exorcise the little gray cells. But unfortunately, the movie does very little with the memoir storyline other than turn it into a joke, and it's during that section that we see Poirot as we have never seen him before. After the Reverend Babington dies at the party I mentioned, Poirot leaves Mexico for Los Angeles for some reason in order to focus on his writing. And instead of being leaned over his keyboard, yes, Poirot is apparently using a 1980s computer, we see him lazing about, looking incredibly unkempt. Gone is the man from Death on the Nile, immaculately attired and wearing a mustache hairnet while sleeping. Instead, his hair is askew, leaned back in a chair, wearing a cardigan over his untucked shirt. That image really surprised me. Despite the costumes getting less detailed in these last few films, Poirot is still always seen as he normally would be. But they use this unusually lax version of the character to show him pull himself together when the case begins properly. You see, the death of the Reverend early on was thought to be of natural causes, until another body drops down Mexico way. Cut to Acapulco, with Poirot and Charles Cartwright arriving to begin investigating. Poirot is back, hair in place, his various white and beige suit jackets staying buttoned at all times. The world-famous detective, again, has a real case. As I've mentioned, Hastings, as played by Jonathan Cecil, is back again in this film, and unfortunately he has reverted back to his clueless roots as we first saw him in 13 at Dinner. As I said then, I don't like that portrayal of the character. He's far too much of a broad comedic instrument and doesn't serve much of a purpose other than to bring Poirot to Mexico in the first place. I described him as looking like Lou Costello in my 13 at Dinner review, and I'd like to correct that. I think here he much more closely resembles Stan Laurel when he is standing off to the side with an expression that betrays the limited thoughts he's having right then. I believe he even gets called an idiot by Poirot at one point in this movie. But despite my misgivings about the character, there is a scene with him that I think was probably the comedic highlight of the movie. He and Poirot become a downright comedy duo when they are searching in a library for the opening to a secret passageway. Of course, Hastings finds it, and the two of them venture inside with only a small flickering flashlight to guide their way. And it's also Hastings that inadvertently closes the door on them, locking them inside. It's probably this scene that brought the Laurel and Hardy comparison to mind, as Poirot is telling him off the whole way down these stone steps. Like I said, I don't care for this version of Hastings, but Peter Ustinov and Jonathan Cecil somehow always find a couple little moments to shine together. Also in the cast is Tony Curtis, who I talked about a little while ago in my review of The Mirror Cracked, where I thought he was just great in his role as a film producer. Here he is playing the movie star Charles Cartwright. It's interesting seeing him and Ustinov together, this movie being somewhat of a reunion after they were both in Spartacus, but I have to say, while watching, I kept feeling that Tony Curtis was pretty bad in this film for most of the runtime. I thought it might be the script, and he's just delivering a performance he thought was worthy of the material, but in general his line deliveries seemed lazy and unconvincing. But then, in the climactic scene of the movie, he does come alive in the midst of the mystery's resolution, which I appreciated. And discovering the outcome of the mystery, you realize that this character was putting on an act the whole time. So maybe we can excuse the rest of his performance as Charles Cartwright not giving a great performance to those around him. I feel a little bad saying this, as I typically like Tony Curtis, and his seeming indifference kind of bothered me early on. But again, it was nice seeing him rise to the occasion for his final moments. That final scene actually felt a little similar to me as the ending of 13 at Dinner. That one also had a film actor, there played by Faye Dunaway, suffering a psychotic break of sorts. The rest of the cast felt pretty generic. There were several characters that, if they were in scenes alone, I found it hard to remember which one was which, and it was only when the whole group comes together that I was reminded that some of these characters are in fact actually two different people. But I will mention Dana Elcar playing Dr. Strange, Dr. Willie Strange. His performance isn't really a standout, but I grew up watching MacGyver, so anytime Pete Thornton shows up in anything, I kind of enjoy it. And finally, Pedro Armendariz Jr. plays the local police officer that is ostensibly in charge of the cases. I enjoy seeing him in pretty much anything. He's appeared in westerns that I love, Chisholm in particular, and I enjoyed his scenes with Peter Ustinov very much. The mystery itself in this movie wasn't quite as strong as I would have liked it. The three acts of the title seem to refer to the murders being orchestrated by a certain actor. The investigation of it is split up between several guests, all working with Poirot, resulting in Peter Ustinov not being on screen as much as he has been in the last couple of movies. The murder that kicks things off seems motiveless most of the time. And it turns out it actually was, so it was hard to get involved in the interrogations that take place, as the people doing the questioning have no idea what to ask or who they should even be talking to. And because there's so little to go on throughout the rest of the movie, I think we might get the longest reveal scene out of this whole series, where Poirot has to run through the long sequence of events for two separate crimes. Thankfully, he's always fun to listen to, and seeing his renewed vigor maintains our interest. I believe the movie was all shot on location in Acapulco, and it's quite a tropical, unusual setting for one of these films. There are plenty of travelogue style shots of the streets and aerial photography of the mansion where Cartwright lives, extending out into the water, and it's all lensed very nicely. But I would assume that it was extremely hot on location. The actors mostly look to be wearing as light and breathable clothing as possible, but still, there are many occasions where you can see them visibly sweating. Adding to that Mexican ambiance is the score by Alf Clausen, which has a very fiesta-inspired flavor to it. It's quite a bit different from John Addison's playful music in the last two, which I really liked, but it did fit this film very nicely. So, Murder in Three Acts was maybe my least favorite of this made-for-TV trilogy, but again, there's always fun to be had in these films. If you've enjoyed the previous ones, you'll definitely find something to like here. It was probably a good thing they called it quits after this one, but then, 2 years later, Peter Ustinov returned to the big screen in Appointment with Death, alongside another ensemble cast. I'm assuming that one was a return to a period-set mystery after this brief sojourn through the 1980s, but I'm looking forward to finding out. Thanks for checking out this review. If you enjoyed it, please check back to my channel, Hildebrand Productions, for more reviews. Thanks again, and adios for now.